Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for yet another edition of Film Fanatic. So, hope everyone's doing good. It is Monday at about 8:25. So, yeah, hope everyone's doing good. Had everybody's recovering hopefully from a spectacular weekend. So, yeah, the weather this weekend was pretty awesome for the most part. It was very cool. Yesterday was a absolutely gorgeous day. So it's uh it's an interesting thing. Um, we had a gig yesterday with Quantum at Primo Restaurant, which was super fun. It was a total blast. I Primo Restaurant is a place and a restaurant that's a really unique kind of oasis, I think, to a degree. It's so unique because I've always been a big component of like supporting local businesses and things that are like locally made and things that can affect the immediate uh, economy, the localized economy. You know, when you look at the big scheme of things, as far as national politics or the way the world itself is run, it's completely out of control. It's beyond any kind of real uh, description. But I think that as far as people who are involved to a degree in politics or believe that people can make a difference or a change, I think that stuff always stems to coming back to the local community. I feel like people have a little bit more say so. Their actions, their votes even have a real impact on our local economy. So, and I think it's, a really important thing. And I don't think it really has anything to do with, say, if a person is, say, on the right side of things or on the left side of things. I tend to be extremely on the left side of things. I consider myself to be pretty, really, really progressive and pretty liberal in like the to a degree like the classical sense. Nowadays, it's really hard to tell. I think both systems act as a cult. I don't really think the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. I feel like, well, I always think of the uh, South Park analogy. You have the choice every 4 years between shit sandwich and douchebag, and I feel like that view just nails it, nails politics, especially on a national level and a global level. But I think locally we have more of a voice. And again, those things are only in place because we let those things happen as a society. It's not because I don't believe, you know, our country in the last few years has definitely moved into showing having tremendous frightening shades of fascism, but we still do have a democracy here. We still do have free will when we make our choices. So, compared to other times in history and other countries who just where you just don't have those options. Say like two examples would be China or Saudi Arabia. So we're lucky to a degree that we have that, but at the same time, things have gotten to the point of where they are just completely out of control, and those are all due to you know, our actions. We elect these officials every 4 years. So we have no one else to blame really but ourselves if we feel like things have gone completely insane, or if things have gone in a better, more progressive direction, as opposed to those two countries, just as examples of where you're essentially voting or casting your vote with a gun to your head. So anyway, I don't really like to get into politics, and I'm not gonna go into politics. But as far as like localized, I feel it's an important thing, and I look at it as it affects everyone directly. It affects everyone, directly, and I feel like we see those results for good or bad immediately in this community. And when I bring up Primo, I feel like that's an example of a place that really is totally self sufficient. It is truly like the definition of a farm to table company and business, where everything you get is localized and it's all grown on the premises of where the restaurant is. I think overall it's probably the best restaurant in the state of Maine. Of course, it's very 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 expensive, but this newer thing that they started, where they started doing this music series on Sundays, you can go there and not spend very much money, and I feel like that is a cool situation for people who are like myself, the working poor or the working class. We can go there as a public and not have to spend two paychecks, but be able to kind of enjoy the atmosphere and support something that I think is very worthwhile. So their music series that they started about 2 2 or 3 years ago now, where they do music every Sunday, is just very very cool. And we got the chance to play there yesterday with Quantum, and it was super fun. It was super awesome. I had a total blast. The place gets super busy usually on Sundays. I've been fortunate enough to play there quite a bit the last 2 years, and it kind of evolved for me thinking like this is like probably my favorite gig, just because of how the bands are treated, the musicians are treated really really well. It pays really really well. The musicians are comped, a nice meal and drinks. It's such a beautiful atmosphere. The people there are really nice. It's a cool thing of where it's very a laid back atmosphere, and I think that folks there actually, to a degree, come there to see the music and are actually part of that experience. So it's very very cool. I never thought we would be able to play Primo. Really, uh, I kind of always felt like our music is probably a little too much, or a little bit too weird, or a little bit too strange to be able to play a venue like that. And for us as a band, I do all the booking, and I do all of the legwork when it comes to us doing shows and really everything. And it's just me and my great buddy Mike Whitehead, who plays bass in the band. But it's basically it's my brainchild. I'm the kind of the captain of the ship, and it's my little baby. So I'm the one navigating all of those things, scheduling and it's a lot of work, and it's it's incredibly hard to do in a lot of ways, and but at the same time, I wouldn't you know change it for the world. It's For me, it's the most fulfilling musical project that I have, and I love it more and more every year. We've been doing this band for quite a few years, and I just love it. I just love that the band has evolved to a point now where I feel like we can do all kinds of gigs. I feel like we have a lot more versatility to our sound, and I think we have a lot more of an ability to adapt to an environment. Very much what we do, and it goes, I think, for most musical groups that play gigs, you know, you're always trying to create a vibe, but then you're also adapting to the vibe in the room, you know, to where people are, you know, if there's a lot of people at your show, or maybe there's only a handful, or maybe it's a crowd that is not really, very, very vocal. So you always have to play to the vibe of what's going on. And I think it's also the band has to kind of create that vibe. So there was a time I felt like our band was more kind of heading into the direction of where we could probably just play, kind of dance environments, like house parties and clubs and environments of where people want to kind of party and dance. And that's always been a big part of our sound. It still is. But at one point I felt like as far as like what gigs that we could do as a band, it's maybe just one dimensional because we can't really play a gig of where we're playing background music or straight up ambient music or for people who are dining. I never thought that was a thing. We could only play those kinds of higher energy kinds of places. And I've been in bands that rock bands especially that can only really do that kind of thing, which is awesome and great. But I think if a band, you know, can have a lot of different ways of approaching gigs, it lends itself to to more opportunities, to more venues, to more settings that a band can play at, and have and just be able to possibly have more gigs. And we started, when we were playing, we used to have a pretty long and strong residency at Fog restaurant in Rockland, Maine, which has been closed for a long time, and I don't think it's not. It seems like it's closed for good at this point. We were really fortunate enough to have a couple of years where we had these really awesome residency gigs, and that was where the band really I feel made this transition and a kind of a leap into moving into different directions because suddenly we were going from just playing house parties and regular kind of dance environments or like more loud rock and roll kinds of shows or environments to where suddenly we were playing places of where or a situation of where there was people dining, but there was a different kind of atmosphere, and we really had to adapt to that. So it was really hard for us to do that because we'd have these 3 hour sets, and suddenly like the first hour or hour and a half, it was a real intimate setting, and people were eating and dining, and it was more laid back. It wasn't the time and place that kind of played, heavy dance music. So we really had to adapt to that, and it was hard at first, but I feel like over time, I've always loved music that is part of the ambient style, and also I've always have been a huge fan of soundtracks, and I feel like movie soundtracks. So all of that stuff kind of came to fruition in those kinds of settings, to where we were suddenly I felt like we could slowly be able to adapt to that environment, and typically for those gigs is when we were playing at Fog, we would play kind of more real chill ambient kind of stuff, more background music, and then after a couple hours or like the last set by around 9 o'clock or so, then we'd bring in more of the dance stuff. Whereas before we couldn't really do that, and it was really a great learning experience, and I think it really helped to kind of broaden our sound as a band. And suddenly, after that experience and that real big learning process, I felt like we were able to take on many different kinds of gigs and be able to play in different environments and play to the crowd and just have a little bit more an ability, have more of an ability to adapt to that. So it was great, and so that was I think one of the things to what kind of helped us to be able to play a place like Primo, because it's a combination of that kind of environment where it's background and you're featured, but and there is the opportunity to kind of be featured, to kind of put yourself out there even more. But at the same time, you have to kind of play to the vibe of what's going on. So it was super fun, and the place was, uh, I've like I said, I've been fortunate to play there quite a bit, and I really love that gig. It's my favorite gig that I happen to be involved in, or that I've been involved with, and it gets there's times where it's very very busy there on Sundays. But yesterday, I have to say, it was probably the busiest I've ever seen. I've ever seen it there. It was bananas, and we played a pretty chill set for the most part, and we got to play whatever we wanted to play, and it was great. It was super fun. So we'll see. Maybe we'll be able to do more shows there. It paid really incredibly well. It was super fun, and people seemed to dig it. And it was just, we just kind of did our thing, and there was no fuss, no stress. It was just, it's a great space, because where they have the music, it's in this barn. It's in this outdoor barn, and it's all wood, and the acoustics are awesome. So that was a real big bonus. So yeah, we'll see. I if we could line up something like that where it was like really frequent, I would jump at that. So we'll see. So today's show is on. Yesterday I did a video on the start of a new on a coverage of a new franchise, uh, or not a new franchise, but of a franchise. I've been really enjoying doing videos on full franchises. So I did the first video yesterday on Mad Max, and this is one of the most iconic franchises created by the Australian filmmaker George Miller. Just incredible. And yesterday I did a show on the very first one from 1979, starring Mel Gibson, Mad Max, which was kind of the debut of Mel Gibson, turned him into, a rock star. So, and I, had a real interesting experience around that film in particular, because I was really late to the game to seeing Mad Max. I didn't see Mad Max until probably 10 or 12 years ago for the first time. My first movie that I ever saw, and I think overall it remains to be my favorite of the franchise, is Mad Max 2, or The Road Warrior. And the funny thing is, for years and years, like I said, I grew up watching this movie, and I love it to death. To me, it's every time I watch it, and again, I've seen it a bazillion times. Every time I put it on, or I'm watching it, I'm just like I'm just latched onto my chair. It's such a high octane adrenaline rush when I watch that movie. I just love it so much. Um, Huge fan of science fiction. Of course, horror and science fiction being my two favorite genres. I love these movies because, especially uh, Road Warrior, because it's obviously sci-fi, but also it's a post-apocalyptic science fiction based movie that's at its core is an action movie slash thriller. And and a big fan of dystopian storylines. And I feel like The Road Warrior is like the epitome of that. And, the series is great. I mean, I'm going to eventually do a show on Fury Road, which was the last movie that came out probably about 7 or 8 years ago, which is hard to believe, starring Tom Hardy, Charlize Theron. I mean, that movie is just a masterpiece, unbelievable, unbelievable. But there's something about the Road Warrior that I just, man, it is my one of my go-to movies. I never get sick of it. I always have that same intense experience every time I watch it. It never fails every time I put it on. And getting back to one of the coolest things, getting back to Quantum for a minute, I've always talked about the influences for that band. Um, and of course, there are, tons and tons of musical, inspirations and uh, groups that I, kind of try to borrow ideas from and things that come out subconsciously. I love that saying of that quote. I can't remember who came up with the quote, but it's something that's always stuck with me, and I heard it as a kid, and it's always stuck with me, and it's something that resonates with me more and more now that as I've gotten older and more into the whole process of music. Where that whole saying of where they say good composers borrow, great composers steal. And I really, I just think it is so awesome. Like that has been something that's always stuck with me. And then also the other idea of less at the end of the day is truly more. And, the idea, some of the things that Miles Davis, world famous jazz trumpeter, talked about, where there's not really any such things as mistakes, or it's not really the notes that you play, but the space in between the notes that are the most important. Those those ideas are things that I try to live by, for what it's worth. As when it comes to creating music and when it comes to maybe the focus that I have when I'm creating music. So, and aside from all of the music that I'm really inspired, I got in a really cool conversation with this guy Ben, who is kind of the manager at Primo. Super nice guy. I had a conversation with him a few weeks ago when I was playing there with another band, and I had no idea that he was a musician. And he's always like been a very cool guy, super laid back, very just really accommodating. And he's like our usually the point guy when you're playing there, as far as like you put in your orders and you give him your order. As far as like setup wise, if you have any questions, he's like the point guy. But super cool guy. But I found, he told me he was a musician, which I didn't know. He's also a drummer, which I had no idea. And then biggest thing was he told me that he's really into electronic music, and that this is what he does, mostly electronic music now at home because of his schedule, because he works at Primo full time, and he's been there for many years. So it was cool. And then but yesterday we had a cool conversation about music, and I just we were chit chatting for a little bit, and we were talking about bands that we really love. And I was telling him about the obvious influences like Aphex Twin, and I was telling him about Autechre being my favorite band, Boards of Canada. He, and both of those bands he had never heard of before, and he told me some bands that he'd heard about, and he said that he was really into house music, and I also am really into house music, and our mutual love for Deep Dish. So, and then we talked about music like that's kind of considered to be kind of the noise genre. He's also into that stuff. He said he was really into a lot of early dubstep, and some of that stuff I really liked a lot too. So it was cool. And he gave me a really nice compliment for what it's worth after we got done playing. And when I was setting up my gear, he was commenting. He's like, "Yeah, I have all this stuff at home, and I have this exact I have pretty much the same exact setup at home." And he had some questions for me about how to hook up some things to his computer, when it comes to like MIDI and various other technical questions. And I told him, well, I don't really, when it comes to technology, I keep things pretty simple. I don't really have a very big, elaborate setup. And it is what it is. And I feel like for what I do and for what I try to do, it's plenty of things to try to figure out. And I'm always learning and getting something new out of it. And, I feel like in a lot of ways too, it also has, even though I don't have a very elaborate setup, I don't really use computers. It's very basic. It's basically comes down to a keyboard and a drum machine. That's really what it is. And, that has a loop station, meaning that you can just loop tracks into it. So it's super bare bones. But I feel like with what I have, at least from my perspective, there's an unlimited There's unlimited places that you can go, and it's so capable of doing so many things. For I think in regards to when it comes to recording, and then also from to live performance. I had experiences with other drum machines of that and various other things that worked pretty well in the studio, but when it came to using that equipment for the live setting, it just wasn't as good. The production value wasn't really great. So, but this newer system that I've had for a really long time, I feel like it's, at least in my mind, is is perfect for both of those things because you can really use it in a studio setting, and then you can use it for just writing music. But then I feel like the production value of the stuff is really really good. So it's really great for a live setting too. So I feel really fortunate with that. But he gave me a nice compliment. He's like, "Oh, it's really great to see somebody use this equipment at such a high level." And he was like, "This is awesome." Like, he was inspired by that, and I thought that was really nice. But getting back to influences, I always say my biggest influence for all the weird things I do with Quantum is it's all about my love of film and cinema, everything top to bottom. You know, from like a movie that I say that I love, it could be the aesthetics around it, the way the design of that film is, the cinematography, the narrative around the story. I tend to like movies that have a little bit of a slower pace and it has a build. That is a big thing that I try to use for Quantum. And the theatrical aspects for the band, of where we try to create a vibe, create a theatrical place to view the music. And that's where all my love for masks and wigs and props and all those kinds of things come from. It's all movie related. And the Road Warrior movies, and especially the Road Warrior movie, the second one, is a that one in particular is one of the biggest influences on me when it comes to Quantum, and in particular the performance by Kajil Neeson as the villain, the Hummungus, who plays the Hummungus in the Road Warrior. Big fan of masked villains, and he's like the epitome of that. He's just so badass, and he's just so ruthless and just amazing. And ever since I was a kid, I've just been so enamored with his character as the Hummungus. And he's one of my favorite villains. He's probably outside of, say, yeah, my favorite superhero villain has always been the Joker. But then when it comes to horror films, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, characters like that, the Hummungus is right up there. As far as being my favorite, he's probably my favorite villain of all time when I really think about it. And so that is a direct inspiration for me to try to adapt the whole kind of mask thing in their music. And as far as just the sound and the vibe of this movie. Um, just amazing. And this movie came out in 1982, and of course directed by George Miller. It it came out 2 years after Mad Max. Mad Max came out in 1979, and it was, again, such a funny thing that I discovered Mad Max so late in the game. Did not I always thought for years and years and years that The Road Warrior was its own movie and was the first movie. I knew it was a franchise, and I always thought that that was the first movie. So I was just, my world kind of blew up when I realized, oh no, Mad Max is actually the original, and The Road Warrior is the sequel. So that was a huge revelation for me. But again, and the cast for The Road Warriors is incredible. Of course, Mel Gibson, Emil Minty, Bruce Spence, Virginia Hay, and of course the iconic Jill Nielsen, Vernon Wells, and Max Phillips. Just such a badass movie. And again, the thing that sucks is I don't own this movie on Blu-ray. I only have it on VHS. I've been looking for a few years to try to find a really good copy of The Road Warrior on Blu-ray, and I have not had any luck. I've seen it a bunch of times on Blu-ray. They do sell it, and I'm sure it's really good quality, but I'm waiting to find a copy of the movie where it's like a special edition where there's like special features, maybe a really great high-end Blu-ray 4K version of it. I just haven't been able to find it, which I'm so surprised. The only movie I have in the franchise is Fury Road. I bought Fury Road like pretty much immediately when it came out on Blu-ray, and that is just jaw-dropping. So I would imagine getting The Road Warrior would be easier or easy because the movie is, so iconic. But I have not had any luck. I haven't found it anywhere, even online. But maybe someday I'll come across it. But a masterpiece, The Road Warrior, masterpiece. Definitely my favorite movie in the franchise overall. Obviously, it's tied to me for nostalgic purposes, but just such an amazing movie. So this is Jason Dean, and keep the support coming, and we will see you next time. Peace.